Good afternoon and welcome to today's CFDA webinar, Zero Waste Design. I'm Sasha Brown, the Director of Professional Development at the CFDA, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Shelley Shute, who will be leading this interactive presentation and conversation. Shelley is the founder and CEO of SXD, a New York-based design studio. SXD partners with brands and designers using design expertise and their proprietary technology to create designs with zero fabric waste, less material consumption, and significant cost savings. Shelley is joined by industry innovation and sustainability expert, James Carnes. James is the former VP of Global Strategy and Sustainability at Adidas and a member of the Board of Advisors at Parley for the Ocean. We will hear from Shelley and James on the creative and business opportunities that are enabled by the circular design process of zero waste design, as well as address some of the common misconceptions. For the second half of the webinar, we'll open up the conversation to you all. We encourage you to participate in this dialogue by submitting any of your questions, ideas, comments for Shelley and James via the Q&A tab. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn this webinar over to Shelley.
Thank you so much, Sasha, and thank you everyone for joining. James and I are really excited for this conversation. So our goal for this is just to tell you a bit about zero waste design, but more importantly, to answer any questions you might have and to have a discussion. So please feel free to ask us any questions along the way. We prepared a few slides, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, but then this will be pretty short, so we'll have plenty of time to discuss. So first I'll start with a little bit on myself. I'm Shelley, as Sasha mentioned. I founded SXD officially last year, but actually I've been working on zero waste designs for more than 10 years. I started really getting into it and thinking about it when I was a creative director at Instagram, working with fashion and beauty brands. And I saw so many fashion brands were curious about sustainability, want to do more in this space, but it was so hard to find solutions that were scalable and also actually accessible for their consumers, because a lot of the sustainability solutions added a lot on cost and also added complexity. So it was really hard to get that actually to scale and to get consumer adoption at a wider level. So I started this company and for SXD, and it's been such a great journey, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about zero waste during this session. I'll pass it over to James to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. So, I mean, the main reason you're here is to hear from Shelley and the exciting work that she's been doing over the last few years to start SXD. But just a little bit of my background and kind of why I'm here. I spent the last 28 years working in the sportswear industry, most of that time working for Adidas. I'm still living in Germany, so if I slip up and say Adidas, that's because that's how I have to say it here. I started as a designer. I still feel that I'm a designer, but over the course of my career, I really became obsessed with making better product for athletes and realized that the only way it was set up to do that was either to waste more or to make product more complex. And so my journey was really to focus my innovation thinking around sustainability and processes. And so I spent a lot of time working my way into positions of more influence in the company where I could have an impact on team setup and structure. And I became creative director over the performance division, where that was really the first time I got to see how we could change the process and the product and have a greater impact through design. So that was really exciting for me, to introduce things like knitted footwear, 3D printed soles, and start things like Parley for the Oceans. And a few years back, while I was still creative director, we had taken a little bit of a challenge to create zero waste products. And so when I met Shelley, I had a little bit of background and was able to bring some of the interesting experimentation and was just blown away by how much further along she was. So I kind of came in thinking, yeah, we've tried that. And what was great was that she had already sort of addressed some of those things, and you'll hear from her on that as we go through. So I ended up becoming the head of strategy, the global head of strategy at Adidas, and had the chance to work with a lot of startups. And so I had a network of people and have been working with startups and small companies, and for the last few years, consulting and continuing that passion for innovation and sustainability. So I've been happy to work with Shelley and to give some advice here and there that hopefully works. And hopefully we can take you through a little bit of that journey and excite you about what she's pioneering through this talk today. Back to you.
Thank you, James. And actually, James is our sustainability and innovation expert for SXD too. So I've been learning from James every day, and I'm really excited to have you on this call so you can share a lot of your expertise here too with everyone here. So I'll get things started and just give a little background on zero waste design from our perspective. So a little bit on just how things started for me. I also started as a designer. And when my first design concept that I learned was this idea of creativity under constraint. Because growing up, my family, I come from a pretty frugal background, and we lived in this 70 square foot apartment in China. It was way too small to fit all of our furnitures. So it can only fit either one table or one bed. So my parents challenged me to rearrange furnitures throughout the day and make living work in this really constrained space. And that's where I learned this idea of beauty under constraint and maximizing creativity using the limited resources that we have. And that's super relevant when I think about zero waste design. It's actually the original inspiration for me to start this whole journey. Because when I think about the way we use our resources today to create garments, it's really not maximizing the utilization of the materials that we have. And I think there's so much possibility that we can unlock by thinking about design differently from the start. So this is just a quick overview of what zero waste really means for me. So when we think about pattern making today, there's a good amount of fabric waste in between. So this is just a simple t-shirt, but you see like all this red that is fabric scraps that's left when you cut out a t-shirt. And even though there are technologies today like nesting that really tries to pack things together as tightly as possible, but at the end of the day, when the puzzle pieces don't fit, then there's only so much you can do. There's always waste in between. So I started to think, especially while I was working at Instagram and working with these fashion brands, I started to think, what can we actually do to really change these shapes of the patterns, which has been really the same for centuries? How can we reimagine that to be these puzzle pieces that actually fit together? And that's when I started thinking about zero waste designs. Basically thinking about pattern making in ways where there's no fabric waste in between. But there's more to that, I think, because zero waste design is not new. Many of you probably have dabbled in zero waste designs or have at least heard of it. In fact, it's existed for like thousands of years, and the kimono from Japan is considered one of the OG zero waste designs. But there are a couple of things about zero waste designs that I think we can really explore and push even further. So one is, how can we not only have no fabric waste in between, but actually consume less material? Because that's when you really have efficient designs that use less fabric in total, and therefore you don't have to use so much resources and you save on cost too. And then another thing that I've been thinking a lot is, how do you scale this? Because for a long time, what's really hard about zero waste designs is that every time, let's say if your size changes or you had to grade it differently, or if your fabric width changes, then you have to rethink this entire pattern making to make sure that you're taking into account the new material or the new garment silhouette that you need or things like that. So something that I'm really excited about is my team actually now has 5 engineers from around the world. We actually recently won top world innovative technology at South by Southwest. And we have created these living, breathing pattern, basically that can adapt and adjust in real time across sizes, across materials. So I feel like there's a lot that we can actually do today to push this idea of zero waste and zero waste pattern making even further. So before James and I start discussing even more, I'm going to just share a few examples that hopefully can inspire you to think about the designs. So this is one example that we did actually in Europe, is a pilot that we ran in Europe. And basically what we did is that we took this European brand's top 4 most popular products, and we turned them to zero waste ones. So the simulation that you see are zero waste designs, and the initial photo you saw was their original design. And as you can see, it's almost identical. In fact, we're able to match almost all the key specs while saving them about 20 to 30% on fabric consumption. So they used less material. The only major difference in the design was actually a slightly bigger pocket, which no one really complained about. So we were able to have a bigger pocket, use way less material, so save on fabrics and cost, while really preserving the spirit of the design. And in fact, for this specific project, we just got some of the results back. So the first pilot we actually did 4 SKUs. And just in one season, by turning those 4 SKUs to zero waste, we saved them over 40,000 meters of fabric and about $150,000 in terms of just fabric savings. So I'm really proud of impact like this, because it shows that you can have a really healthy business while being able to save on resources and do something that helps planet at the same time, while not really compromising on good design. And actually, on the topic of design, this is another example. This is one of our wedding gowns actually now on display at the Crystal Bridges Museum of Art. And so for this example, we used dead stock Vera Wang fabrics and used that fabric as a creative constraint to create wedding gowns for people. And in this example, you know, when people go to weddings, you really care about the gown really fitting them well and actually make them feel confident and good. So this was really trying to push the boundaries of what you can do in terms of fit with zero waste designs, to make sure that people still feel great in the garment, while making sure that it's a zero waste pattern. And then the last example I will share is this one that we worked on with climate refugees. So this is a denim jacket. What's special about this is that every single piece of denim from this jacket is made out of raw end fabrics. So we started working with Bangladesh, this manufacturer in Bangladesh that helps to support climate refugees. So there's going to be about 20 million climate refugees in the next years in Bangladesh alone. And these are people who have lost their homes due to climate change and sea level rising. So this factory in Bangladesh, they were working with these climate refugees and helping to support them and pay them so that they can rebuild their homes. And when I started working with them, they told us that that factory and also the factories around them were basically making denim pants for the rest of the world. And because of that, they also had very similar leftover fabrics dimensions. So all the raw end fabrics were these like thin strips of denim that they had just piled up in the factories. So what we did was we found the average dimension of that, and we used those strips to create these denim jackets. And because we were using leftover fabric, and we also had really efficient designs, so we were able to have really, really healthy margin that allowed us to actually pay climate refugees about 4 times the local wage, to support them and actually making sure that they're provided for, while still having a healthy margin for the products that we created for these denim jackets. So hopefully this inspires you a little bit on the range of impact that you can have when you think about really designing from the start, and thinking about sustainability and zero waste from the very beginning. So those are just a few examples I want to share, but maybe James
So,
and I, we can.
yeah,
we can
Shelley,
talk a little-
we're starting to get questions in, and I think people are probably gonna ask some of the things that I'm gonna grill you on, but
Okay.
so you've now got about a year doing this, and you've met with a pretty good number of clients, I would say, right? And I know all of them that we can't really disclose, but like from very, very large global brands to small fashion houses. And you've had quite a variety, like a breadth of responses to your design approach and also the software you're using. And one of the ones, I'll ask you a couple of these, but one of the ones that comes up is, you know, a lot of the bigger ones have spent quite a bit of time reducing their waste and increasing the yield of their patterns. And we hear this one pretty commonly, well, we're already above 90% in terms of our yield. What's the big difference if we're at 100% or if we just, you know, collect the scraps and, you know, they're not very much, or we collect the scraps and we recycle them? What are we telling those people who have that point of view?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this. And also, James, I know you also have expertise here, so would love to hear your thoughts too. From my perspective, I think, first of all, all these almost zero waste designs or zero waste designs, they're not all created the same. And you might have very close to 100% zero waste, but it might not actually be a sustainable or a actually very efficient design, because you might be using folds, you might be using like just more darts and things like that to create the garment, but actually ends up consuming more fabrics than they should. And that's actually not a net positive, not from a business standpoint where you had to use more materials now, not really from a sustainability standpoint either, because yes, maybe the scraps that was before on the cutting room floor, now it's just more weight on the consumer who's going to be wearing it. So for me, there's actually a huge difference between just a zero waste or almost zero waste design and one that is actually done in the most efficient way possible. Recently, we're actually currently working with a music label on turning all their merch to zero waste across all their artists and all the tour merch from hoodies, t-shirts, and other things. And one of the zero waste t-shirts we made, usually manufacturers have to order about 1.3 to 1.5 yards for a t-shirt. But for a zero waste one that we created that was really trying to maximize efficiency as much as possible, it ended up being only 0.82 yards. So that is a huge reduction in the material that you use. And that's when zero waste design to me start to really make sense, because it makes sense from scalability perspective, from really cost cutting and really using less materials. But
Yeah.
James, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, because you
Well,
are
I mean,
also.
yeah, I think one of the things that I get that triggers my thinking when I hear that is the constant acceptance of recycling as being the answer. And I think it needs to be understood that recycling is a response to not solving design problems up front. Whenever we have to recycle, it's because we haven't done our job in the beginning. And I think anybody who thinks it's okay to collect scraps of waste and recycle them probably just isn't aware of how much energy, how much labor, how much re-dyeing and pollution goes into recycling that could be avoided, you know, if we took care of it on the front end. So I think that's usually my approach to that. But another thing that, you know, you mentioned, you talked a lot about merch and t-shirts and hoodies. And I think one of the stigmas sometimes that comes up about zero waste items is that it's kind of limited to mass market and, let's say, I don't know, lower on the creativity scale. Talk to me a little bit about your experimentation with more highly complex and not straight designed patterns, which I think is what everyone assumes it's going to be, just pure straight lines.
You're so right. And I'm not going to lie, when I first started the company, we were mainly using those straight line designs. But especially when we start to branch more into the technology side and really trying to, because our technology uses AI and machine learning, and that is only as good as the initial data set that you feed into it. So we really try to expand the range of what is possible from a design standpoint. That's when we start to realize there's actually so much more that you can push from a design standpoint for zero waste. So first and foremost, curves are totally possible with zero waste designs, as long as you actually use the piece from both sides of the curve. And so we've really started experimenting with different curve shapes so that we can actually have that kind of curve throughout the design. So actually, we just created a jacket zero waste design for one of the brands recently that had like all the curves that you can think of for a jacket, around the arms, around the neck, all the areas. But we were able to achieve all of that by making sure that curves are actually symmetrical enough that they match together well, and they can all the pieces can be used. And that another thing I'll say is that and I really believe in this concept that constraint can unleash new innovation and new creative thinking. Actually, recently when we were working on this like top design for merch for this with this manufacturer, they asked us, they're like, oh, we never seen things being sewn this way, like this like triangular shape, and they started calling it the SXD triangle. And when we were designing, we're just thinking this makes the most sense given the limit, like the constraint of the fabric. We just want to have the best cool design using that material. And then without us even knowing it, we came up with this new design concept that the manufacturer hadn't seen before. And basically it was like a triangular way of creating designs on the side of the top to actually help with the enhance the fit better, and also making it just more sturdier too. So I really believe in actually being able to push creativity with zero waste at the same time.
I mean, I think that's super important because, having come from the sports industry, the belief that you need garments that are really like fitted anatomically was such a critical part of the design process. And that's a really important thing that you're actually getting onto right now, is developing that ability to create those curved patterns so that you can get more of a fitted for motion or fitted for anatomical movement built into the patterns. I have another question that I'm asking. I'm sort of asking these in surrogate because I don't know if they come up, but we got more coming in. So we'll get to those in just a second because they look great. Where have you found companies positioning this? Because on the one side, there's the perception that it's just a bunch of straight lines and, we could probably do it ourselves. And on the other side, you've got this software that you've been developing that is learning software. So which is it? Are you more design development pattern making, or are you more of a tech company? Like, talk through a little bit of somehow the uniqueness and the hybridization that you're finding that you're bringing to these companies that they don't necessarily even know where to put you.
Yeah, what I'm most proud of with what we're building is the ability to combine design and technology, because I think neither one on its own is enough. Just design on its own, it can be great, but it might be really hard to scale every time you change the size. I mean, you might have the best zero waste design concept, but then you had to grade it. Now you had to grade it across, let's say, like 8 different sizes. And do you really have the bandwidth to do that every single time and create a new pattern every time? You can't. So that's where technology is really helpful. But at the same time, I know that for this industry, unless you make sure that design is great, there's no meaning to even be doing this in the first place. Something that we actually always say at SXD is that no matter how sustainable something is, if it's not loved and it's not worn by people, then it's more waste. And that's something we really strongly believe in. So I really see us as a design-led studio here in New York, where we are powered by technology that we're proud of, that's award-winning, But I see technology as a way to help us scale great design ideas and bring it to life with brands. I don't know if there are a lot of independent designers in the audience. I will say though, when we were fundraising, really playing up the technology was super cool to investors. And so, you know,
Right.
I think having the tech piece is something that investors are super drawn to, and it really helps you to have the investor support. But I also think as you're running your own company, you have to know what works for this specific industry. And I think this is an industry that cares about, more than probably any other industry, cares about beauty, cares about having great products that people
Mhm.
love. And I think that has to be at the center of.
And while you were talking about that, someone came in and asked, what about sizing, grading, to bringing this to scale? Is that something that's as simple as like typical grading technologies like Gerber might have, or are you doing something a little different with how you're able to grade through your software?
That's a great question. It is totally different, actually. Because the fabric width is the same, so for us, grading actually means using more fabric length while keeping the width of the material the same. So that what that means is we might need to rearrange pattern pieces as you're expanding them. It might mean that you have to rotate pattern pieces or change the directionality, or sometimes even tweak the shapes a little bit. And so it's a lot of art and science of making sure that the silhouette is very consistent from size to size. But at the same time, you're really making sure that it's a efficient, scalable design at the same time. So yeah, it's actually something very new that we're exploring right now. And something that I actually get really excited about this too is I think the way we've been grading has been the same for a long time. You know, you kind of start with the medium, and then you had this like standard giving your brand. Maybe you like add 2 inches to like the circumference of the hips, and then you add like one inch to the length or something like for the next size. And it becomes this very like linear thing. But actually, that's not how people actually are in terms of sizes. Because, for example, like if you're a larger size, it actually might not just be 2 inches and 1 inch. You might not actually be taller. So there's so much more to think about to really grade something correctly. And now that we're kind of really changing the whole sizing process, it actually opens up the opportunity to really think about what do people care about the most actually when you're going down or going up a size, and can we really accommodate that while maintaining zero waste. So I actually find that really exciting.
That was one of the things I was blown away by when you showed me one of the graded sets of patterns, and I can't remember which piece it was, but I expected the usual where you essentially grade up each of the pieces according to, you know, adding length or stitch allowance. And you actually end up sometimes having what looks like a relatively different pattern when you go from a medium to a large or large to XL. And I think that actually dispels one of those common beliefs that like zero waste is straight lines and probably isn't going to fit. So I think that's a really important one. Should we dive into a couple of these questions and get the conversation going? Because there's some good stuff coming in.
Yeah, sounds great. Actually, you know what? I also wanted to build on what you said earlier, James, on recycling real quick, because I loved what you said. First of all, you know, when we were starting the company, we were thinking about what do we start with in terms of materials. And we did all this research and we realized the best thing to do is actually just use existing material, because you can go all you want towards like recycled material and all that, but all that takes energy, like you said. And there's all this leftover fabric. We're currently talking to one of the largest manufacturers in the world, and they talk about just they get tons and tons of fabric just in dead stock rolls every single week. And it's a huge liability to them. Brands actually had to pay for it. And it's just a really bad process. And that is a material that we really want to use as a starting point as much as possible. And then to your point on also recycled materials, I think there's a lot of really cool innovation right now going, moving towards material innovation. And something that I'm excited about is actually collaborating with material innovators, because something about material innovation is that in the beginning it might be expensive because you don't have that economies of scale that
Right.
other fabric manufacturers might have. But what we can do is to make sure you use that material in the most efficient way. You might actually use less of it, so that in total this product doesn't actually have to cost more. So something I'm actually really excited about is to collaborate with people who are thinking about different materials.
Can I dive into some of these questions for you? Because some of them are really already on that topic. One of them here is, and I'll just read it because I think it's due respect to the thought people put into this. So we have a person who's head of production for a small/medium-sized brand, and they've accumulated thousands of meters of leftover fabrics from season to season because of minimums with the mills. They're hard to use from season to season, probably because of seasonality. Trends, market changes. Have you found ways for brands to reuse or offload old inventory sustainably? Do you have some experience with this, or are you starting to see anything happen on the basis of zero waste being an option for them?
Yeah. So actually exactly on this is something we're working on right now. Is first of all, what our software does is that one of the first piece of information you put in is actually your existing fabric width. And that's where the entire design is built on top of. And so, so for all the leftover materials that you have, we can literally use that as a starting point for really cool new products and new designs. So I think there's definitely use for that. And then in terms of, on trend or off trend, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is, well, first, can we move towards like fewer types of materials, and then ones that are more timeless, so that if it's left over, it can be more easily reused. And that's something that we're actually working on with a lot of our manufacturing partners. One of them actually educated us on this. They said that they started working with this brand. In the beginning, they had like literally thousands of different colors of this fabric that were almost exactly the same. So one of the first thing they did with the brand was to really focus on a fewer options, so that it can be better reused, and it can be more efficiently used. Another thing that actually we've started exploring is, right now when we put in orders, we think about, okay, can we make 1,000 t-shirts, or can we make 10,000 jackets? But actually, that's not how rolls of fabric work, because this roll of fabric might make 677 t-shirts instead of 1,000, and it's these odd numbers based on your design. So something that we've been experimenting more is, can we work backwards, where the first thing we do is actually figure out how much material you have, and then we take orders that are actually filling up the quantity that's required to use up that material, that roll of fabric, rather than the other way around.
Yeah, and I was just going to come back to one of my experiences, and I think you saw this as well when you went to Bangladesh, is that it doesn't really rear itself as like an ugly problem until the factories are kind of screwed with holding the fabrics, and they tend to be very proactive about it. What's really cool is when you can do just what you said, you can actually very easily, as a brand or manufacturer, like take stock of what you have in quantities, and all you need to know is the width of the fabric, right? And then of course the length to know how much quantity you can create. And then you can start applying all sorts of different things and come up with really creative things. I think what I saw in the past with big brands like Adidas was they just go make bags, right? And if you just end up making, cheap bags out of great fabric, you're not really creating a solution to the problem. You're just probably creating more waste, like you said. Cool. Interesting one here. With my background in footwear, someone is immediately asking, is this only for apparel, or have you addressed anything for shoe design or shoe manufacturing yet? Or is that possible?
Yeah, so actually we have a patent pending right now that's on zero waste shoe design, and it's definitely possible. I'll say that we haven't focused as much on shoe design yet, but it's an area that I'm really curious to know more about. In fact, also we started talking to furniture manufacturers as well as car manufacturers. Last week we were on call with BMW and Jaguar, who are talking about their seats and how there's a lot of fabric waste there too. So I definitely see this being more than just garment. James, what about your experience? I'm just curious because of your background in footwear.
Well, I think there's another question here that I want to throw in with it, but I think one of the really difficult things that always has been a challenge for footwear designers or footwear manufacturers is the use of straight lines. So the more that you're bringing in curvature and the ability to kind of nest pieces 100% with a symmetrical curve makes a huge opportunity that hasn't been explored. We did a shoe years ago called the Element Refine, and it was cool and it was almost zero waste, but it was all straight lines. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity that so far has only really been resolved through flat knitting, or in some cases 3D knitting with like a Stoll ADF, for example. But that's one of these questions here as well that I think is really interesting. Someone's asking, how does seamless knitting and 3D knitting fit into your technology? Since at the core, those technologies are really, about, if not zero waste, almost full reduction of waste as well. And have you looked into that?
Actually, James, I've learned so much about that from you. I still remember one.
It's like a setup to ask you to ask me. Yeah.
Exactly, when you were showing me those knit pieces, and I just thought it was so cool because you're talking about how you can play with tension within the thread, so that it within the yarn, so that it actually when combined with cut and sew, it actually helps to make the fit better while it's zero waste. I thought that was really cool. I really think there's so much potential to combining cut and sew zero waste pattern making that's efficient, plus things like knitting, because I think that's where you can get the best of both worlds, the versatility of knitting and also the efficiency that you can have when you have really great zero waste designs from cut and sew. For me, we decided to start with cut and sew just because of the scalability, and we also knew that not everyone has access to 3D knitting right off the bat. It can be expensive, it can be time consuming. So we really wanted to go after an area that we thought if we can crack, we can impact the most number of people. But the more I learn about knitting, especially from you, James, so please share your experience. Yeah, the more excited I get about this space.
Yeah, I mean, especially when we talk about, functional garments, or really, high value, highly creative and really, more tailored to body kind of shapes. I think the possibility to have, a kind of mix of cut and sew components with knitting will completely reframe the opportunity for creation. And that's where I get excited, because typically we view, fully fashioned garments and cut and sew as kind of these classifications that rarely intersect. And I think that the way that you're building this creates a whole new opportunity for that. It's true, flat knit or 3D knitted components tend to be a little bit more expensive right now, but it's like anything, it's economy of scale. I remember when we started doing knit footwear, the first components took 45 minutes to make, and they were, $35, as part of this, just a component cost on the FOB. And now you can get a knit upper, for under $8. So economy of scale and a matter of time and investment, I think could really change that pretty dramatically. There are two interesting questions here, Shelley, about natural materials. So one of them is just saying, asking, have you really thought about what role this can play with some of the basic natural materials like cotton and hemp? Are there any particular tweaks to this that apply there? And then another question is, our thoughts on regenerative agriculture with regard to that. And, do those play a different role? Are those part of this? What are you thinking in terms of material types?
Yeah, I'm super excited about all those directions. And I see what we do as a collaborator and a partner to those kind of solutions. From the beginning, when we're building the tech side of XXD, we want to be able to work with as many types of fabrics as possible. So for us, it was whether or not it's any kind of desk stock or materials like this, we can make it work. And so I really see us as a partner to these kind of really awesome new directions that's coming out, that I'm really excited about. And one, I think I mentioned this before, but what I'm really excited about from our partnership perspective is to be able to actually help get these kind of solutions off the ground, because in the beginning they tend to be expensive. Then it tends to be harder to compete against more traditional materials, just because this is so novel and there's not that economies of scale yet. So what I want SXC to be is to be a platform that helps bring this kind of solution to market by using this kind of material in the most efficient way possible, so that in total, maybe you use less of it, even though it might be more expensive per yard or per piece. So that's why I'm excited.
Well, yeah, and I'd add to that. I think, you know, this is more something you and I haven't discussed, but it's a point of view I bring very strongly to this. I think that what zero waste as a philosophy is more congruent or parallel with natural materials, particularly when you talk about regenerative fibers. I think those should be the most pristine and precious fabrics that we can create, should be those that are created like in concert with the earth. And the right thing to do is not to waste those and attempt to recycle them. You know, it's great that we have these technologies being built to recycle natural fibers, but again, it's because we're wasting them. And so if you can choose not to waste them, I think that zero waste and organic, regenerative, and natural fiber construction absolutely goes hand in hand by far more than the classic mindset of recycling, which is in fact a great solution for synthetic polymers. You know, those can be recycled. They can actually be engineered and designed for multiple uses. They're just not. You know, we raised and paid a lot of really genius people to create one-use materials. We could have just asked them to create multi-use materials, which we're starting to do now. So I think those two go hand in hand, and I really appreciate people asking about that, just to give me a chance to give a point of view on that.
I know, and I'm just learning so much now. So cool. Just
another one that came up that I think is super interesting is back to more pragmatic. Have you dealt with any supplier relations or factories who are seeing the benefit of being able to just reduce orders on fabrics and kind of streamline their purchasing so that they don't end up with these huge archives of dead stock material? Is that something you've started to see or experience?
Meaning, so I guess if I understand this question correctly, it's about are factories okay with actually ordering less material? Is that what this is about?
Or have they started to see the benefit from it? Like, have they actually started to realize that, you know, instead of ordering, you know, if you're saving 10%, if you go from 90% yield to 100%, you're ordering, you know, 9,000 meters instead of 10,000 meters. Have you seen that start to happen, you know, with supply chain and sourcing partners?
Yeah, so I can talk about the good side and the side that we're still trying to figure out that like has been keeping me up at night. So the positive part, the opportunity you're talking about, James, we are starting to see that, yes. So like the example I mentioned before, when you used to have to order like 1.3 to 1.5 yards for a t-shirt, and now it's like 0.82. That is a big difference. And then you can really cut down on the orders that of fabric that you need. And this can be like a margin share thing where like maybe the price of the garment doesn't have to go down as much, and the added margin is shared benefit between the factory and the brand. So these are things that we're really excited about from the opportunity side. That said, I think this question is really interesting because we also know that with these factories, they have more negotiation power with the textile mills the more they order for in terms of fabrics. So because we are so efficient with materials, a lot of times we do hear from our factories like, yes, but now we're only ordering this much. So it's kind of below this threshold of us actually being able to really negotiate for a good rate with the textile mills. In fact, they might not even want to work with us because we're becoming like a smaller partner. So something that actually my teammate Colleen and I, we've been working a lot on is to think about how can we bundle the demand. So yes, like a single order might be requiring less fabric now, but we have so many partners that we're working with. So if we can be smart about how we can bundle the pieces, now we actually have a pretty large order, and that can help this supplier, this manufacturer have the negotiation power that they need to then go to their textile mills. But I will say this is something that's been keeping me up at night, because it's like a balance of how the economy has just been working, how the business side of this industry has been working, which is really on like minimums and large quantities, versus where I really want us to move towards, which is much more about on demand and not making things that we don't need.
Yeah, and I think you answered that last question that just came up. Do we send the wrong message to textile mills, for example, or to the industry that if we can, use up every piece that's made, then do we have to worry about, slowing down production? And I think that what I'm hoping is, an answer to that from what we've discussed is we're hoping that this whole thing kicks off a mindset shift, that we need to stop wasting, right? And overproduction, the whole futures model of ordering in advance, and warehousing goods, all of that needs to change. And I think, we're just SXD is just a small cog at this time in that big machine, but, it could send a wrong message, but I think in the end, what you just described is probably the more likely outcome, that they'll start to see that less is needed, not more is needed. And they'll start to have to realize that the order process needs to change from what they do today. Another one just came in. Before a company takes on the challenge and cost of revising their pattern blocks to be zero waste, are there any training opportunities at the factory level to reduce waste in cutting or grading? It says we work in Africa, and a lot of what we work with are hand woven fabrics and a lot of manually made and used patterns.
Very interesting.
So probably not the same opportunity to use, some of the more advanced pattern engineering software, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a great time to start thinking about how not only to place things more efficiently, which I think it's mostly what's been done, it's using existing patterns and just try to place them in a more efficient way, but instead to start to think about, are there ways to use those used patterns, and maybe just tweak some parts that probably doesn't, like pockets, I feel like it's always one of the best places to start in the patterns, where like there's freedom, especially when it comes to pockets that's hidden. There's actually some things that you can play around to just start decreasing the usage of the material. Something that we've also done is we released some of our patterns open source before, that's zero waste. So I would say if you're interested, we would love to share some of that with you, so you can experiment with that with your factory.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to say that. I mean, the other thing I would highlight is you were kind of getting at that, but the opportunity to basically include trims. So, a lot of times we'll include trims as a separate fabric or a separate component. And I've seen you do, you keep saying pockets. I've seen you do also collars, and my favorite is drawstrings. So I was surprised by that. You did a hoodie, and I thought, how in the world is she going to, get 100% zero waste with drawstrings? And you just used the waste, right? So you built it in to the garment, you rolled them up, you had them with a single or double stitch, and those became the drawstring, and they worked beautifully. So I think more examples like that, I think would be perfect as descriptions for, let's say, principles. So if someone's talking about like training pattern engineers, obviously they can access some of your open source patterns that you've made available, but also the mindset of, trying to use every single piece that's available for something in the design of the garment, especially if you're talking about people who are manually creating fabrics. That's probably even the next level of pristine material above regenerative in my mind, where not only have you carefully crafted the raw materials, but now you're carefully crafting the material itself, the fabric itself with human hands. So you don't want a single piece to go to waste because of the effort and energy that's put into that. And you've got some great examples of that. I'm trying to see if I've missed anything here, because there's been so many good ones that have been asked. I think we've actually, there's a question for you personally here.
Okay.
Just talking about how inspiring your story is, recognizing the importance of the design process, as a strategic part of the change in sustainability. For you, Shelley, what made you take the leap from designer or apparel designer to wanting to build this company and get into things like, tech and software? Like, what was the turning point for you that you realized this was going to be your future?
Yeah, well, I think my colleague Colleen is on the call, but she was part of my inspiration because we were together and we're just talking about the company one day, and we realized that as one single design brand, there's only so much you can do in this industry, because you can be as big as Adidas or Nike, but you really still only have like 1% of the market, because this is such a fragmented industry, such a fragmented market. So we realized that the way for us to really make a difference in this space is to become a platform that others can plug into, can work with, that the biggest impact we can make, even though I love designing just myself, but the biggest impact we can make is less about just creating more of our zero waste designs, because frankly, none of us need more stuff in this world, but instead about converting and switching existing items into zero waste ones by working with others. So I think that's where, for me, that was like a aha moment where I thought we really need to start thinking about shifting and to be a better partner to other players in this space.
That leads into, I think, what's one of the last questions that I want to get to, and pretty profound, given that today is the 10th anniversary of the Rana Plaza disaster tragedy that we all know about. The question is pretty simple. What hopes do we have for the future and the potential for a safer, more ethical, people equitable supply chain? Do we see the potential for zero waste and efficiency to be a positive factor in catalyzing change?
I love this question, and I really think so. I think for too long, our industry has relied on cheap labor and abusing labor a lot of times for that cost advantage, for that cost cutting. And I just think that can never happen again. I don't want that to happen again. And I think with zero waste, we can start to have solutions where we actually can have a sustainable cost advantage while still treating our workforce better and all those seamstresses better. And I saw a glimpse of that when we started working with the climate refugees in Bangladesh. And this was a factory that really wanted to change just because of what has happened in Bangladesh before. And I saw firsthand, just by having more conscious thinking from a design standpoint, that we can increase the margin and actually transfer some of that savings to help climate refugees and help the workers. And it makes a real difference. We've seen people actually send their kids to school for the first time, or have their much older parents finally retire for the first time. And I think that is the way that we should think about our workforce, is that they're the people that we need to take care of. And we should use design as an enabler to take care of workers better. So I feel really strongly about this space, and I'm really passionate about this topic. And in fact, something that I'm also been thinking about is how can we bring this idea more to more of the designers and the brands that we collaborate with. Because a lot of times when we start to talk about cost saving associated with efficient zero waste designs, the first thing everyone is thinking is like, okay, this is going to help with the brand's margin. But I think there's a lot more that we can do with that cost saving, including helping the workers.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I mean, I was hoping you would talk about that example, but I want to say that was one of the reasons why I was convinced immediately to work with you. The fact that you were able to go in and actually negotiate that change, that the factory saw the benefit in using the savings, the cost savings, to increase wages and to take care of people. And they saw the value in their workers, and they saw that the tool itself was giving them a business advantage. So very often we hear that we have to fund the future, we have to fund sustainability. And I think you've created a solution where, in fact, you are funding the ability to create amazing things just through the process you've created itself. So last quick question. I see Sasha coming up to tell us, we're at the end, but how does somebody, I'm going to give you the plug. How does somebody get in touch with you? How do they work with you? Where are you? Like, what's the process?
Yes, please reach out to Sasha. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Who can put us in touch. We would love to work with you. We would love to continue the conversation. Thank you all so much for joining.
Shelly actually generously is donating a big chunk of her time to meet one-on-one with anyone who's interested in having a conversation, has specific questions about their business needs, challenges. Those are going to be held on May 4th. So please, again, just email me and I'll make sure to connect you to Shelly. But I want to say thank you, James, for joining this conversation and for hosting this amazing conversation with Shelly. And Shelly, thank you so much for all your important work and for leading this with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. And Shelly and I work together very often. So if anybody also wants to have me join, I'll leave that up to Shelly, but I'm quite happy to do so as well.
Amazing. Thank you, James. All right, everyone, take care. Thank you for today.
Thank you.
Yep.